Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast, Season 4, Episode Number 1. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion. Well, we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Wow, the first episode of the 4th season. Thank you all of you who have taken this journey with me. What's on tap for this week? There's so much to talk about that I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to cram it all into one episode. As part of my New Year's resolution, I'm going to make videos and actually put them on the social medias, and I'm going to limit the things that I talk about here in this podcast so that I can actually make videos. Our president, Joe Biden, made a speech about how the institution of democracy itself was at stake in the election in the year of our Lord 2024, which I find hilarious because the Democrats have completely changed the way the Democratic primary operates so that Joe Biden could win that primary. Is this irony lost on all of us as a voting public? Well, let's find out. I'll make some videos and we'll see what happens. As far as the content on this podcast, well, I wanted to let everyone know that I am actively trying to promote the podcast, figure out how I can make it better, how I can make the user experience easier, and I wanted to do a segment on why I believe that I've failed to create a more robust, to create a more popular podcast. I also wanted to extend that understanding of failure to one Detroit Lions football team. Yes, I did wait to do this segment, which is going to be more and more a part of the way I approach not only podcasting, but the way that I cast judgment on anything in my life. I had to wait to not only get all sides of the story, then put my thoughts together on why Detroit going for 2 in the Dallas Cowboys contest that was very likely going to decide who had home field advantage throughout the course of the playoffs, why it still constituted a fail on the part of the Detroit Lions. Stay tuned, dear listener. And finally, Fargo, Season 5, Episode 8. An up and down episode, in my opinion. We can review and reflect. Thank you for listening. Thank you for patronizing. If you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5 stars. Please write a review. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting.
Act 1. Why I Fail.
Welcome to 2024, dear listener. I thought I'd start this podcast season with an appropriate segment, Why I Fail. Now, why do I say that it's appropriate? I've been looking at a lot of different information, YouTube videos. I've read blog posts. I've actually gotten a book on podcasting. And I commit the number one sin in podcasting when it comes to building an audience. I am not specific. I do not have a specific niche. I do not have a specific topic. As many of you know, I will talk about anything that comes to mind. And in trying to market that, particularly to a segment or a niche of a population, it doesn't really work. And I haven't been doing this long enough that I have such a following that I can throw out anything that comes to mind, and that's going to garner enough attention to get momentum week to week on a podcast like this. In addition, when you have a podcast that's named This Is Why I Don't Vote, people make assumptions, and rightfully so. It sounds like it's going to be a political show. It sounds like it's going to be a negative political show, a satirical political show, and it started out to be that way, even though I've always had this predilection, this space, this fallback position, whatever you want to call it, when it comes to sports. I always am going to throw in the sports. Many of my favorite segments to do are sports related, and the podcast is more reflective of me as a person than it is of the podcasting community or what podcasts have grown to be. I am someone who has divergent tastes, and I don't like the same thing over and over again, and that is my uniqueness. I realize, as much as anyone will tell you, I am unique in that I have such divergent tastes. Most people do not. And they may tell you that they do. We all like to make believe that we've got divergent tastes. Do we really? Who's the number one retailer in the world? It's Walmart. Who's the number one restaurateur in the world? It's McDonald's. People like the same thing, and they like it over and over again, so much so that you could go from Kansas City, Missouri, to Spokane, Washington, to San Diego, California, to Naples, Florida, to Bangor, Maine. The McDonald's are going to look the same. The Walmart is going to look the same. Most people would like to believe that that similarity, that uniformity, that's only in certain things, like a place to eat or a place to shop. What I've found is that most people carry that with them. It is a subconscious predilection. Maybe that's not the right word. A subconscious program. And that they don't realize the extent to which they're seeking out similarity or uniformity. And I'm not saying this in a negative way. It doesn't make me better than anyone else that I don't like uniformity, that I don't like the similarity. In fact, it's been a detriment in my life where when I get really good at something, when I have a proficiency, hell, you could call it a mastery, I get bored and I want to do something else. And particularly when that comes to a career, when that comes to making money, that can cost you. Particular to this podcast, I'm not sure exactly what direction that I'm going to go in or to what extent that I'm going to continue the podcast in this current format. I realize, and I have, I guess, let go is the best way to say it, or given up on. I don't want to say given up on. I've let go. I am no longer concerned with these weekly numbers. Given the way I approach the podcast, given what I do, I'm not sure I'm ever going to have that marquee moment where this thing just blows up and there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of listeners, because the topics are so varied, it's not going to be something that people can return to week and get more of the same. One pledge that I am going to make to you here, dear listeners, I'm going to do a video every week for the podcast episode. I'll very likely do it on Instagram, and because I have the channel, maybe I can translate that to a YouTube short. You never know how things work out. I could be that one Hail Mary out of a million that actually gets caught in the end zone. So I am going to continue letting my brain spill out onto this audible format, and I'll create a few videos for it and see what happens. In the meantime, thank you all for your support. I do appreciate it. You will have the opportunity to listen to me for a little while longer.
Act 2. Why the Detroit Lions failed.
I didn't want to come out and immediately make a comment about the 2-point conversion that the Detroit Lions had against the Dallas Cowboys, what was over a week ago, in a pivotal game between the two to decide very likely who's going to have home field advantage throughout the course of the playoffs. For those of you that may not be familiar, and I know that's a very few because that was a national news story that actually bled outside of the world of sports, the Detroit Lions scored a late touchdown in a football game against the Dallas Cowboys with only a few seconds left in the game. It was 21-20. The Detroit Lions needed to but kick an extra point to tie the game and go into overtime. The coach of the Detroit Lions, Dan Campbell, told the team prior to the drive starting that scored the touchdown, we're going to go down, we're going to score a touchdown, we're going to go for 2, and we're going to win the game. Now, again, for those of you that are not huge sports fans, a team can elect to kick the extra point in the game, or a team can elect to go for 2 and try to advance the ball into the end zone from the 2.5-yard line. According to the Detroit Lions, they had a special play conjured up for just this scenario. They had practiced it all week, and what they did was, and again, I know this is probably rudimentary for many of you listening to the podcast, you have people who are on the line of scrimmage. That's where the ball is. That's where you see all those people lined up. You have people on the line of scrimmage. Some of them are called eligible, and some of them are called ineligible. What it means to be ineligible is even though you're on the line of scrimmage and the ball is snapped, you can't touch the football. You just aren't allowed to touch it. And I'm not going to go into all the reasons why, but there's probably 5, sometimes 6 people on the line of scrimmage who are ineligible to touch the football. Based on numbers, this is how the referees can figure out if someone has touched the ball, whether or not it's an immediate penalty, or whether or not this is an eligible receiver of the football. And those numbers are usually in the 5s, the 6s, the 7s. So if you see a guy on a football field and you say, that's a large man, and he has a number in the 50s, a number in the 60s, or a number in the 70s, that person is ineligible to touch the football unless, this is why we love sports, unless that person goes over to the referees and declares himself eligible. You physically walk over to the referee and you say, I am eligible. The referee will then announce on the PA, will announce to the entire crowd, to all the people watching the game on television, that this person has come in and has declared himself eligible. And then based on where he lines up on the field, he can then go out and touch the football after it is snapped. The Detroit Lions go out to run this play to score the 2 points. They have a lineman go over and tell the referees that this lineman is eligible. They line up, they run the play, they actually complete a pass to what we believe to be, and I say we as an audience, we believe to be an eligible wide receiver, someone who lined up on the line in a lineman's number, in a lineman's position, yet went out into a passing play and caught the football and scored the 2-point conversion. Lo and behold, a penalty flag is thrown and that call is reversed. This person was not eligible and the penalty is then assessed to the Detroit Lions, 5 yards. The try is no good. This was all an uproar for the last week, and I want to comment on it because I find that no one has pointed out a fatal flaw in the Detroit Lions strategy. Now, what did the Lions do trying to be coy, trying to be clever? They sent several linemen out into the huddle prior to this play being run, and several of those linemen approached the referees, ostensibly one of them being an eligible receiver, even though they've got a lineman's number on. And what happens? Yes, the Cowboys were confused. Who was more confused than the Cowboys? In fact, it was the referees. As we find out in the post-game conference that Dan Campbell gave the next day, not his comments immediately after the game, but in his post-game conference a day after the game, Campbell admits, hey, we sent a bunch of linemen out there. We sent several of them over to the referees at different times, so the Cowboys would get confused as to which one was eligible. Who in fact got confused? It was the referees. They declared the wrong lineman eligible. A guy went over, said, I'm eligible. His number was 68. Another guy went over, didn't say anything. His number was 70. The referees announced 70 as the eligible receiver. You can actually hear it on the audio during the game. I remember hearing it before the play was run. I remember the referee saying a lineman's eligible, and I didn't even take note of it that it was number 70. But the referees, in accordance with the way the rules work, they took into stock that people were coming over. One of them was a lineman declaring eligible. They announced that lineman being eligible. The play is run, and then they say, no, that's a penalty. What I thought was interesting, no one is commenting on this. The number of the eligible receiver announced was number 70. So the Cowboys on the field, the players, they heard that. The Cowboys on the sideline, the players, they heard that. The coaches on the sideline for the Cowboys, they heard that. And all of their opposites heard that. So all of the Detroit Lions who were out on the football field, they heard this eligible receiver being number 70. Now, they knew the play that they were about to run, and they knew the first look. They knew where Goff, the quarterback for the Detroit Lions, wanted to go with the football based on the play being run, and they knew that the lineman who had announced eligible was not number 70, it was number 68. The coaches and the players on the sideline, on Detroit's sideline, they had to have heard all of that as well. So the second they hear that the number is not correct, that they are running the play for number 68 and number 70 has been declared eligible, you would think that somebody in the Lions huddle, whether it be number 70 himself, number 68, right? These two different linemen that have come in, one being declared eligible, he's probably thinking to himself, I'm not the right one. And number 68, he's got to be saying they should have announced my number. Jared Goff, the Lions quarterback, in that huddle, waiting for the lineman to come back over so that he could call the play, he had to have heard the referee announce the wrong number. And in particular, the people on the Detroit Lions coaching staff, Dan Campbell himself, they had to have heard number 70 being declared eligible, not hearing number 68 being declared eligible and thinking to themselves, that doesn't sound right because we're running the play for number 68. People are making a big deal of the fact that Dan Campbell was screaming at the referees, that Jared Goff was screaming at the referees about that play that they had told the referees at the beginning of the football game. There's a likelihood that we're going to run a 2-point play. We're going to have offensive linemen come in and declare themselves eligible. Be ready for that. What's interesting about this whole debacle, were the referees wrong? Of course they were wrong. Number 68 came in, declared himself eligible, but because numerous linemen were around the referees got the wrong number. The person didn't come in and say, at least according to the interviews that were done after the game, I'm number 68, I'm declaring myself eligible. All that lineman did was come over and say eligible when other linemen were in the referee's orbit. So the referees got the wrong number. They declared the wrong number. The play was run. And because they got the wrong number in their heads about who was declaring themselves eligible, they called a penalty. The play didn't go through. The Lions end up losing the game. So who did the Lions fool? The Lions wanted to fool someone. They had the intent to fool someone. Who did they fool? Did they fool the Dallas Cowboys? Why, in fact, they did. They ran that play, and the play was effective. The 2-point conversion was successful, and the Lions thought they had won the game. Well, the Lions' attention was on confusing the Cowboys' defense, which they did. Unfortunately, it was also very effective at confusing the referees. Now, this goes to an age-old argument about the National Football League, it being the number one league, sports league in the United States of America, and very likely in North America. It's valued billions and billions and billions of dollars, and yet what a lot of people don't realize is that the referees are not full-time employees. They're not even full-time as independent contractors. They are part-time independent contractors. NFL referees go home after the season is over, and many of them have other careers. And because of the types of careers that they have, they are able to leave that career for 7, 8, 9 months out of the year and then resume it after the NFL season is over. And although you might think, based on these types of debacles, that the NFL would then be moved to have full-time referees, yet I believe it's the exact opposite. I believe it's like professional wrestling. Vince McMahon himself, there's no bad publicity. That the NFL, even with other sports like the NHL and the NBA going on at the same time with college bowl season, the NFL can maintain that top tagline on every single one of the sports websites. It's the first story on every one of the sports news shows. It's the first thing that anyone's talking about in a talk show, in a podcast. It's negative in that it's a poor reflection on these referees, but it's positive insofar as everyone's talking about the National Football League. Many people are pointing out that the NFL crew that screwed up the call during the Detroit Lions-Dallas Cowboys game has notoriously been bad this season, and maybe even in seasons past. And again, I don't think anyone really cares in the NFL league office. That officiating crew won't get a playoff assignment. That will be the penalty. As far as changing anything, why? It's still publicity for the league. And why do the Lions fail? I really put this on the Detroit Lions. If they have this master plan and they hear that the referees call the wrong number, It's on the coaching staff. It's on the quarterback. It's on the person who declared himself eligible in the first place to correct the referees. At this point in time, as sophisticated as we are as consumers, it doesn't matter who you are, whether or not you're a player in the National Football League, a coach, whether or not you were a consumer of the product, you know by now that the referees are not a reliable, independent source to arbitrate any kind of dispute during the course of a football game. Did someone hold? Did someone get held? Is it pass interference? Is it not? I actually saw a blog post that really rang true to me because I didn't think about this watching football 20 years ago. Many of the best referees have retired out of the National Football League. They're making significantly more money being part of the broadcast team during these NFL games. So when you have some of these big names that come on to analyze a play, these were people that were capably officiating these games on the field, and they said there's more money to be had by being in a broadcast booth. I'm leaving the job. And now you have either people who are new or you have the B and C team, right? You don't have the A team anymore. You've got B teams and C teams. These are not as good referees, and they've proven that over the course of time, and this is just what you're going to get. So if you are part of the football game, you have to realize as much. And if you're a consumer of the football product, you have to realize as much as well. They're going to get the calls wrong. There's no change in the rules that's going to magically make that disappear. And frankly, I feel the league enjoys as much. It's just additional publicity. And this leads me to my next and final point. All of these coaches, all of the time that they spend, all the stories that you hear about people sleeping in their office, they're doing all of this different work on scouting teams, scouting players. Do these teams scout the refs? Do they understand the referees individually and as crews when they're going into these football games? Do they realize whether or not this is a crew that calls a lot of pass interference penalties, whether or not any of the referees in the backfield call a lot of pass interference penalties? Do they recognize whether or not these are referees who routinely get calls on the line of scrimmage wrong, whether or not holding penalties are just given out freely, or whether or not they're stingy about that? Do they recognize that there are referee crews that get things like eligible assignments wrong? If you're going to spend all of that time and energy and money on scouting other teams and scouting other coaches and scouting other players, why are you not scouting the referees? Why do you not know that you may be in a football game with a referee or a refereeing crew that routinely screws up certain elements of the game, and you have to make it crystal clear to them what you're doing in order to make sure that they get it right? Not that you've fooled the other team, not that you've fooled the other coaches, that you don't fool the referees themselves. This is where the lawyer comes out in me and wants to knock the heads of the Lions coaching staff together like it's a Three Stooges skit. Why would you not have, if you're going to try to confuse the Cowboys, why would you not have the eligible lineman go over and say, my name is Decker, my number is 68, I'm declaring as eligible? Why would you only have that lineman go over and say eligible? The lineman himself, Decker, in his post-game interview says, I did exactly what the coaches told me. I walked over to the referees and I said eligible. And then I walked away. If there are multiple linemen in the orbit of the referees in that vicinity and all you say is eligible, are you not giving them the opportunity to screw it up? Act like you're in the military. Act like you're a prisoner of war. State your name, state your number, and state your purpose. So congratulations, Detroit Lions. You fooled everyone on the field. You fooled everyone on the field during your 2-point conversion attempt, the Dallas Cowboys defense, and all of the referees, and you got what was coming to you accordingly. It is not on these referees who've proven themselves incapable of doing so to double check your work, to make sure that all of the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. They are known quantities. Act accordingly, particularly when you hear them make a mistake.
Act 3 Reflections on Fargo Season 5, Episode 8.
Episode 8 of Season 5 of Fargo was one of the shortest 48 minutes I can remember in my entire life. That episode just flew by. And that's not to say that I was impressed with every part of the episode. In fact, much of this reflections segment is going to be to express my disappointment in how the story has unfolded, though that disappointment has not gotten me off of the show. I'm still in, I'm still bought in, I'm still excited to see how things play out over the course of the last 2 episodes. You may recall that I did a piece last week on whether or not Dot was still in North Dakota, Minnesota, parts unknown, and the reason why I indulged in such speculation is because when Dot was in the hospital room, she asked for her husband. The nurse says yes. She says Wayne. The nurse says yes. And then in comes Roy. I felt like, okay, well, from a storyline, if the nurse doesn't know any different between Roy and Wayne, then perhaps Dot is not in a hospital in the state of North Dakota, and maybe not even in a hospital in the state of Minnesota. And yet it turns out that Dot is in a hospital in Bismarck, North Dakota, the county where one Roy Tillman is a sheriff. Now, I'm not going to go on about this because from a plot standpoint, I believe that Roy Tillman cast such a shadow that if he said, go in there and let her know her husband's here, and if it's Wayne, confirm it's still her husband, don't let her know, not Wayne, it's Roy, the nurse would have complied with such a request. Why do I say that? Well, as we see in the scene where they're trying to check out, Roy is keeping Dot close and making sure that there's no scene, no spectacle. Dot puts help me on the discharge paperwork, and Roy turns to the discharge nurse, calls her by name, crumples up that piece of paper, and asks her to print out another discharge form. So clearly, Roy is a known quantity in the hospital, and clearly all of the people in the hospital are a known quantity to Roy Tillman. He knows them by name. So if he were to perform a ruse on the injured Dot and have the nurse be part of it, he could probably call that nurse by name and say, go in and tell her that her husband Wayne is here. To the extent that she gave a quizzical look, one Roy Tillman would probably just say, go ahead and do it, darling. Thankfully, we see Whit Farr, the North Dakota State Trooper that we met very early on in the show, who gets shot by Ule. He comes in for what looks like a drunk or a drugged up person who's going to have to be admitted to the hospital, sees what he recognizes as Dorothy Lyon, who is being called Nadine by all of the sheriff's deputies and, in fact, the sheriff himself, and then tries to interject, recognizing that she was a kidnapped victim, that she broke away, and that potentially the people that kidnapped her are these sheriff's deputies. I say thankfully because the fact that Whit Farr has not appeared in the program since probably, I believe, the 3rd episode is somewhat of a omission by the writers. And this happened last season as well in Fargo Season 4. Some characters were fully fleshed out and some were not. Some were just props, is probably the best way to put it. Props within the storyline. They helped progress the story in pivotal spots, but were not part of the larger story. And really, their backstory wasn't as well told as it could be. Given the evolution of this storyline and how quickly or rapidly it's progressing, I'm not sure we're going to get much more of a backstory for Whit Farr. I'm speculating that he's going to be the bridge between what has now been a slow burn to the inferno that will be the escalation of police involvement, the sheriff's office, the militia versus the FBI and the state troopers. Granted, I could be wrong because there are 2 episodes left, so there is some time left. It just doesn't present, though, that we're going to get any more out of the Whit Farr character, and I think that that is a hole in the writing, and that was present in Fargo Season 4 as well. Speaking of holes in the writing, I did not like in any way, shape, or form how the sheriff's debate went down. It just did not resonate with me whatsoever, and maybe I'm getting too far into my lawyer hat. It has been well pulled down over my eyes. The whole concept that you're going to go and get 3 debtors and have their names changed and then somehow get them on the ballot so that they can participate in a debate a week before the election where no other candidate appears on the debate stage, it just doesn't make any sense to me. If you recall, dear listener, if we hearken back to episodes 1 and 2, there are newspaper articles about the election for sheriff heating up, which of course implies that there are other candidates, if not one other candidate, that's challenging Roy Tillman for the office, and that the debate therefore becomes pivotal in deciding who may win or who may lose. This is also the implication of many of the things that the characters are saying and doing by way of Gator being concerned about the amount of money that's being spent and the fact that Roy is worried about both his re-election campaign and being able to financially support this militia group. Yet in the debate, there seems to be no other opposing party besides these 3 newcomers that have changed their name to the same name as the sheriff. And somehow, within, I guess, 1 week of the actual debate, get on the ballots such that they can be participants in the debate. I'm not buying for a second that you'd have an election chair that would allow someone to come up on the stage simply because they have the same name as the current incumbent and have them become part of the debate. And the Roy Tillman character reaches out. He asked for the board of elector. I don't know the guy's name. I can't remember, and I didn't write it down. But he asked for that board of elector to present so that he could challenge the fact that there's 3 people he doesn't recognize who have the same name as he does as part of this debate, which doesn't seem to make any sense. If this is something that has been orchestrated by Danish Graves, it wasn't well told as part of the overall story. So if Danish Graves has not only gotten these 3 debtors from the state of North Dakota, had their names changed, then gotten them on the ballot somehow, and then had them be part of the debate by bribing the board of elector, it's just not fluid. I don't buy. Too many holes there, and it's just too convenient that Roy would get so mad at this circus, right? This dog and pony show that he would turn around and punch the reporter that's moderating the debate. It's just too convenient. It's just too easy. Remember the first season of True Detective, how well that story was put together for the first 7 or 8 episodes? And in the last 2 episodes, it just absolutely falls apart because it's so formulaic. And it's not even a puzzle. It's almost like, well, let's use the puzzle analogy. If it's a puzzle, it's like a 4-piece puzzle for children aged 6 months to 2 years. It's just too simple and too convenient. And that's how I felt about this whole orchestrated, cartoonish debate. I'm wavering in this moment. I don't like it. I'm wondering where the story is going to go next. And I think what happens next is so brilliant, it just pulled me right back in. You have the shot of the family pulling up at the ranch, and let's make note of what that means, the family. You've got the wife, you've got the kids, and you've got the father-in-law. So the father-in-law is present in the community well enough that he can be front and center at the debate. And Roy's current wife, wisely, this is a strategic position that she takes, stirs up this anger in Roy because of the presence of Nadine, his former wife. And I say Nadine purposefully because in the universe that is, the people who were in that car, Roy Tillman, his new wife, and his wife's father, his father-in-law, that's what she is. She's this former wife, Nadine, that ran away, and the new wife stirs up in him the anger that he felt at the embarrassment over what happened in the debate to have it be taken out on her, right? So she's reasserting her position in the hierarchy in her relationship with Roy. You see this anger and resentment reflected in the wife when she actually meets for the first time Nadine and slaps her. And what do we get as Roy exits the vehicle and is walking over to what, as a viewer, you have to assume is the place where Nadine is being held captive. It's that long shot. It's that one consecutive shot. And Jon Hamm, let's give him the Emmy for that performance. The anger that you can see in his face as he's walking, because it's a long walk from the vehicle all the way around the ranch to where Nadine is being held. Brilliant. I thought the way it was shot was brilliant. I love that one long camera take. I love the fact that they did not leave Jon Hamm's face throughout the course of that one take, which that's challenging for an actor to maintain that character and that type of composition for that length of time and have it be so believable. It translates so well from Jon Hamm's face to we, the viewer, through the television screen. I also felt like the violence that went on between Nadine and Roy, it was so well done and well choreographed between what those two characters were, that he was violent against someone that he thought was weaker and that was not in a position to challenge him. And Dot, in her guile, in her dexterity, always being able to outthink him and get one over on him. Therefore, it's an even match. He has brute strength. She has tact. She has strategic planning, and she has guile. Before we get too far from it, I do want to make note of the opening scene where you have Danish Graves going through a handwritten ledger for those debtors in North Dakota that he thinks would be good candidates to change their name so that he can carry out this plan. Although it's not completely spelled out, he obviously goes to these people. He says, we're going to absolve you of all of your debts if you agree to change your name and appear in this comical farce of a debate. They do so. So it appears that they get the benefit of that bargain. It just struck me as curious the way that whole scene was shot, the fact that it was in a ledger, that the ledger was handwritten, and we're talking about what has been presented to us as the largest debt collection agency in the nation, a publicly traded company. There seemed to be some intent behind the fact that that's the way they kept their records, or at least kept their records in a certain situation for certain debtors. You'd figure it would be on some kind of computer database. It would all be electronic. I wanted to make note of that because if any of you have a reference that was actually in reference to another season of Fargo the movie, it's part of the Coen Brothers universe in general, I don't know. It didn't place with me, but it did strike me as curious. I believe it was done with specific intent. In other reflections, yes, the adultery was confirmed in this episode. Indira's husband was in fact cheating on her, and that part of his malaise may have been because he was having that affair the entire time. It's really not that important a part of the story, except for Indira coming of age. She was supportive of someone who had been such a leech to her, and yet now was just shaking that off as she's coming out of this shell of who she was. And yeah, we can use a caterpillar butterfly type analogy. Again, not very pleased with it. Whit Farr, the North Dakota State Trooper, advancing the story again by curiously running into Danish Graves after his orchestration of the debacle that was the debate, and telling Danish Graves that he saw Dot being carried off by Roy Tillman. As soon as Danish presented at the house and got the call from Lorraine, who had been informed by Indira that Dot was a captive of Roy Tillman, and he doesn't take the call, I knew he was a dead man. I'm not sure if you felt the same way, dear listener, but walking into that house thinking that he had the upper hand and that somehow he was going to negotiate his way into the better graces of Lorraine Lyon, I knew that that was a dead man walking. And the way that that scene was executed, pun intended, was dark and sinister, very well done by the actors and the writers. The line, "How can you be so smart when you're dead?" Chilling. That leads me to a couple of puzzle pieces that I'm putting together, and maybe I'm just stretching here. Maybe this is not really correlated. When Gator comes in and has that conversation with Dot, and Dot reveals to him that There's a reason why his last name is Tillman and yet his first name is not Roy, that all Roy had to do was take one look at him and he knew that he wasn't going to be worthy of his father's name and his grandfather's name. And she has this plea with him that she can take him to her mother. And yet we know that the only recollection that she has of Linda that's authentic, at least within the universe of the show that we've been presented, is back when she was 15 years old. The Linda that she met in this utopia fantasy, that was a dream. And the reason I'm using the word correlation, maybe these things are correlated, is because when she looks out of the window that she has broken in an attempt to escape again, and she sees that Danish Graves is dead and that his body is being deposited in some sort of hole next to this windmill, and she realizes that's the windmill from my dream. I'm wondering if, as part of her psychotic break from this Nadine person that she grew up being to Dot, the person that she wanted to become, that she has dreams that become her reality so that she can play the role of Dot, even though that's not who she grew up as. The character Dot seems astonished when she recognizes the windmill where she presented to get that box, I believe it was, tin that had the postcard that led her to Utopia. She recognized it from the fact that it was at the ranch. And clearly, anything that was in and around that windmill was a dead body. So this may be the correlation between what Roy told her, I'll take you to Linda, I'll bury you right next to her, and the hole that dead bodies get buried in on the Tillman Ranch. It took me a second when Dot had that curious look on her face about recognizing the windmill. Perhaps it was that she dreamt it and thought it was real, or perhaps it was the recognition that, wow, Linda is dead. That's very likely where her body is buried, because that was a large hole, and it doesn't appear that that was the only body that they put into that large hole, because they very quickly started dumping some sort of substance into the hole, demonstrating a level of proficiency and practice, leading one to believe that this has been done before. I am still excited about the future of this Fargo season. This was an uneven episode, in my opinion. I think that it could have made some things clearer and decided to focus on other events. I think you could have had the adultery exposure with Indira much shorter. I think you could have gotten the point across with that long one-take shot of Roy walking from the car to where Nadine was being held, had that shortened, and then had some sort of bridge between Danish Graves getting these guys to change their names and getting them somehow on the ballot to be part of the debate stage. Maybe they're not on the ballot. Maybe he bribed the board of elector. Maybe he bribed the news reporter. I don't know. We don't know. It wasn't part of the story, and it just didn't make sense in the grand scheme of things, in the way the story had been presented to us up until that point. If this is a contested election and I'm a candidate contesting the incumbent, why am I not on that debate stage? An uneven episode for sure. And that's a testament to how good the show is, that I found so many of the things in the episode to be objectionable, and yet I still enjoyed the episode. I felt it was way too short. It was the fastest 48 minutes that I've probably experienced, well, at least in a television show or a movie that I can remember. So I am excited for the final two episodes. Ule coming up out of the back seat when Gator's driving away from the ranch. That hook alone has me salivating. I'm excited to break them down, to reflect on them with you, dear listener. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.